Iran knows that it is losing this war. Israel has established supremacy over Iranian airspace. Iran knows that it's losing and wants to avoid a comprehensive defeat. That is why they have reached out already through intermediaries like Qatar and asking for peace talks. So if
Pavel,
that outcome succeeds, we're going to see lower oil prices.
Okay, Pavel, your contention is Iran is losing this war, and by all accounts, they are. They're on the back foot, and their options are increasingly limited. Does it simply come down to math? Is that why you're thinking these guys are much more incentivized now to sit down and talk as opposed to continue fighting? Does it come down to math in the sense that, their ballistic missiles, they had a lot of them. The Israelis took out a bunch. But at the rate they're firing and that they need to fire to get through, Iron Dome, et cetera, they're probably going to run out in probably less than 2 weeks. Is that your thinking as well?
Iran has limited military capabilities to respond against Israel. But in a broader sense, Iran is worried about regime change, right? If the Americans enter the war on Israel's side, a very plausible outcome would be a change of regime in Tehran. And of course, from the perspective of that regime, they want to avoid that at all costs. So if that means, going to the peace table, that's what they'll do.
So here's the question, right? If the Ayatollahs, right, the mullahs, if they want to stay in power, which seems to be what you're saying, right, they've got to get something back, right? What the West wants and has wanted for some time now is, look, your nuclear program, you've got to get it back down to a civilian use level. My question to you is, how realistic is that? They're up at 60, 70% enrichment, U-238, right? If you want to just keep the lights on, if it's just for civilian use, you only need about 5% enrichment. So how do you dial that back?
Well, the technical means to do that would involve intensive IAEA inspections. Inspectors going in. We saw this movie with Iraq. You're showing the map on the screen right now, going back, 2 decades ago. So there are ways to accomplish this. Again, if there is political will on the part of the Iranians to reach a negotiated settlement, and if that's what it takes to avoid regime change, I believe they will sign.
Okay. Meantime, the risk is still, right, on oil, that it could go higher. We've got several houses calling 100. I think J.P. Morgan was looking at 130. I've heard 150 as well. But that's on the presumption that there is U.S. involvement, either alone or together with the Israelis, and we have strikes, U.S. strikes on Iran. The response so far from the Iranians, I've seen reports that they're starting to stop and inspect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. It's not a blockade. They're not closing off that channel, right? But they're making it harder. How significant is that, and why is oil not higher?
The only way for current or higher oil prices to be sustained would be if there is an actual disruption to Middle Eastern oil supply. We have not seen any evidence of that happening. So Iranian exports, which is 1.5 million barrels a day, continue normally, and oil tankers continue to go through the Strait of Hormuz. That's about 20 million barrels a day. It would make no sense rationally for Iran to blockade that strait. Number one, their own oil could not be exported. They would lose their economy. And number two, it would immediately result in retaliation by, the United States, other major powers. By the way, where does oil going through the Strait of Hormuz go? In large part to China and India. Those are Iran's main trading partners. So, for Iran to anger the Chinese, again, would make absolutely no sense.
All right, I take your point there, and also that in terms of Iranian oil, the exports amount to 1.5 million barrels a day. That's 1.5% of global supply. And the risk more is other people's oil, their neighbors' oil going through the Strait of Hormuz getting choked off as well. On the supply side, Pavel, I was talking to another guest earlier this morning who was saying, the situation isn't that dire, not just because OPEC Plus has been increasing production for 3 months in a row now, but also because on the U.S. side, they've been lifting the SPR. That has sort of gone unnoticed.
Yep. So the good news in this rather bleak time is that even if hypothetically the Strait of Hormuz were to be shut down, there is plenty of emergency oil stockpiles around the world to accommodate the oil demand during that time of unblocking the straits. Under the International Energy Agency, there is 1.2 billion barrels of emergency stockpiles that's separate from the private sector's own stockpiles. 1.2 billion barrels. So that means, hypothetically, you could block the Strait of Hormuz for 60 days, and we would have enough supply to accommodate demand. Again, I don't believe the Iranians will play that game, but if the emergency arises, there is more than enough oil to prevent any sort of gasoline shortage or deficit scenario.